People still ask me why I never sold the place. 900 acres of hard grass and a house that leans a little east, and a man my age with no one left to leave it to. The offer was good. I want to be clear about that. The offer was very, very good. And I want to be clear about something else. I'm not a kind man. Ask anybody in Rosebud County. Ask my wife if you can find her. I offered that girl a home because it was 31 below zero and because I did not want to be the man who found a body in his own barn come morning. That's the whole of it. There was no goodness in it. But she was in my barn 9 months. And in those 9 months she took something out of me that I'd had welded shut for 3 winters, and she put something else in its place. And to this day, I could not tell you the name of the thing she gave me. I only know I could not have bought it, not for the price of the ranch, not for 10 times that. Let me tell you how it started. The calf was already half dead when I got the barn door open. So was she. 4:40 in the morning, February, wind coming off the Powder River like it had a personal grudge. I'd gone out because the heifers were close, and because I don't sleep, hadn't since Wyatt, and the barn is a better place to not sleep than the kitchen is. My flashlight found the heifer first, down on her side in the straw, ribs going like a bellows, done in. And then it found the pile of coats in the corner, and the pile of coats moved. I want you to understand I nearly shot her. Not out of malice. Out of the plain animal fright of a 61-year-old man alone on a ranch 4 miles off the county road, finding a shape in his barn at 4 in the morning. My hand went to my hip, which is where a pistol would have been if I'd been the kind of man who carries one, which I am not, and so my hand just went to my hip and stayed there, feeling foolish. The shape sat up. Under the coats was a newborn calf, wet, steaming, and around the calf were 2 arms, and above the arms was a face. She had a black eye. That was the first thing. Not fresh, going yellow at the edges, a week old maybe. The second thing was that her hands were bare and purple, and she'd wrapped them under the calf's belly where the heat was, and she wasn't looking at me at all. She was looking at the calf's nose to see if it was still fogging. "He is small," she said, accent thick as roofing tar. "The mother does not stand." I stood in my own barn doorway with the wind shoving at my back, and I did not know what to say to that. So I said, "Move." She moved, not far, about 8 inches, and she kept one hand on the calf. The heifer had a twisted uterus, and I knew it before I knelt, from the way she'd quit. I got my arm in her and did what you do, and I'm not going to describe it, and it didn't matter anyway. She went out from under me at about 5 in the morning with her eye open and her tongue out in the straw, and I sat back on my heels and swore at the ceiling for a while. The girl was still holding the calf. "He can drink," she said. "He can drink," I said. "Colostrum's in the freezer up at the house." I stopped. Why in God's name was I explaining my freezer inventory to a stranger? "Who are you?" She looked at me for the first time, really looked, and there was nothing in her face I could use. Not fear, not apology. Just this flat, awful patience, like a person waiting at a bus stop in a country where the buses have stopped running. "Nadya," she said. "That's not what I asked." "It is what I have," she said. Roy Kesse showed up at 7 the way he'd shown up at 7 for 19 years, and found me in the kitchen tube-feeding a calf on my linoleum, and a young woman asleep, sitting up in Colleen's old chair with her boots still on. Roy is San Carlos Apache and about as talkative as fence wire, and he has exactly one facial expression which he deploys with great subtlety. He looked at the calf. He looked at the girl. He looked at me. He got himself coffee. "You gonna ask?" I said. "Nope. Found her in the barn." She kept that calf alive 4 hours in a 30-below barn, with nothing but her coat in her arms. Roy drank his coffee. Then he said, quiet so as not to wake her, "Her hands look bad." They did. That was the thing nobody tells you about frostbite. It isn't dramatic. It's just that the fingers go the wrong color and then they go the wrong color deeper, and by the time it hurts, the argument's over. When she finally woke at 9, and I made her sit at the table and put her hands in a bowl of lukewarm water. She made a sound like a chair leg dragging on concrete, and then she stopped making any sound at all. And she watched the window the whole time, and her jaw was going like she was chewing something. She lost the tip of the left ring finger, just the tip, past the last knuckle 5 weeks later in a clinic in Miles City that I paid cash for. She looked at the stitches afterward and said, "Now I do not have to buy a ring," and laughed, and I remember thinking, "Oh hell, this one's going to be a problem." Here's what I got out of her, over about 4 months, in pieces roughly the size of nickels. She was 24. She was from a city called Chelyabinsk that I had to go look up on a map in my son's old atlas, and when I found it, it was so far east it embarrassed me. She'd come over on a summer work visa, one of those programs where a resort in Wyoming promises you $11 an hour and a cultural exchange, and instead you get $7 an hour, a mattress in a room with 5 other girls, and the man in the office holding everybody's passport for safekeeping. She'd stayed past the summer because the money hadn't come out right, and she'd told her mother she was sending money. She'd worked winter at a motel. Then something happened at the motel that she never once described, and about which I never once asked, and afterward she got on a bus with a duffel bag going in whatever direction the bus was going. She got off in Forsyth. She walked. She said she thought she was walking toward a town. She was walking toward my ranch, and there is nothing on that road for 11 miles, and it was 31 below, and she'd been walking for 3 hours when she saw my barn light. "You could have knocked on the house," I said. She looked at me like I was a child. "Man alone, night, strange girl," she shrugged with one shoulder. "The barn is warmer than what happens if I knock." I didn't have a thing to say to that. I still don't. Now, I've told this part of it 100 times, and it always comes out sounding like a nice thing I did, and it was not. I told her she could stay in the room over the shop. That was calculation. If she stayed in the house and anybody in Rosebud County heard about it, I'd have been the punchline of a bar in about 4 days. And there's a certain kind of talk a man doesn't want said about him at 61 when his boy is dead, and his wife is in Bozeman with a chiropractor. I told her I'd pay her cash. That was calculation too, but a different flavor. She had no papers. Her visa had gone dead a year and change back. Paying her on the books would have put her name in a computer, and I did not know then, and do not know now, exactly what would have come out of that computer to get her, but I could guess. And I told myself out loud in the truck, driving to town for calf pull chains, 8 weeks. Calving's done in 8 weeks. She gets some money together, she gets on a bus, that's the end of it. Roy heard me say something like that. He was rebuilding a swather knife on the shop bench with his glasses down his nose. He said, "You know what I like about you, Ellis?" I said, "What?" He said, "You lie to yourself out loud. Saves everybody time." She worked like the barn was on fire, and always had been. I have hired maybe 40 men in my life. I have hired college boys and rodeo boys and one fellow from Nebraska who cried when he had to castrate a bull calf. I have never in my life seen a person go at work the way that girl went at work. Not fast. That's the thing people get wrong. She was not fast. She was unstoppable, which is different and rarer and worth about 8 times as much. She learned to run the feed truck in a day. She learned to read a heifer in about 10. By the end of March she could tell you, standing at the fence with a cup of coffee, which one was going to need help that night, and she was right often enough that Roy started asking her instead of me, which I pretended to resent. The calf lived, the one from the barn. She named him, which is a thing you do not do. You do not name the ones you're going to sell. Everybody knows this, and I told her so, and she looked at me with her cheek full of bread and said, "Ivan." And that was the end of the discussion. Ivan grew up crooked and enormous and would follow her around the corral like a dog. And Roy called him the Russian for 4 years and would not be talked out of it. She had this habit. When she was thinking hard, she'd rub the stump of that ring finger with her thumb, back and forth, back and forth. She did it in the truck. She did it in church. That one time I made her come to church. I'd catch it out of the corner of my eye and something in my chest would go sideways, and I'd think about a barn at 4 in the morning and a girl with her arms around a wet calf, in the dark, not knowing if anyone was ever going to open that door. I keep a ledger. Green cloth cover, cheap, the kind the co-op sells for $11. One line a day. Weather mostly. Clear, wind SW20. Skiff of snow. 2 inches wet. 29 years of it up on the shelf in the mudroom, and my father did it before me, and his father did whatever the hell his father did, which was probably drink. Colleen used to say it was the most romantic thing about me, and also the saddest. She'd say, 29 years of a man riding down the sky and not one word about anybody in the house. Which is true. I looked it up once. April 9, 3 years ago, the day of the funeral, the whole entry is clear, wind N15 gusting, cold for the date. That is the sum total of what I had to say about my son. In April, I came in from the corrals, and she was standing in the hallway with her hand on the door of Wyatt's room. She hadn't opened it. She was just standing there with her hand flat on the wood, listening to it, the way you'd listen to a wall to see if there's a bee's nest inside. I said her name, and my voice came out wrong. She took her hand off the door and turned around, and she wasn't startled. She wasn't guilty. She was sorry, which was worse, and she said, "The photograph in the kitchen. The boy on the horse." "Get out of the hall," I said. "Alice, get out of the goddamn hall." She went. She went out the back and across the yard and up the stairs to the shop, and she didn't come in for supper, and I stood in the kitchen with both hands on the counter for a long time, and then I went and sat in the truck for a longer time, out in the dark with the engine off, and I did not cry because I have not cried, and that is not something I brag about. It is just a fact about my equipment. Some men are built wrong. Around 11, I walked out to the shop, light on under the door. I stood at the bottom of the stairs like a man at a bus stop in a country where the buses have stopped running, and I said, loud enough to go through the door, "Wyatt." His name was Wyatt. He was 19. He rolled a truck on the Ashland Road on a dry night with nothing in his blood. It was nobody's fault. That's the worst of it. It was nobody's fault. "Quiet up there." Then her voice close, right on the other side of the door, so she'd been standing there the whole while. "Thank you." "For what?" A long pause. Then, "In my language there is a word. It means when you say the name of the dead out loud, so they are not only inside you." She stopped. "I don't know it in English." "There isn't one," I said, "in English." "No," she agreed. "I have noticed this about English." Things got better after that. In the crooked way things get better. She started coming to the house for supper. She could not cook worth a damn. She'd been raised by a grandmother who cooked, which is the surest way to never learn, but she could make one thing, some kind of soup with dill and sour cream in it, and she made it approximately every 9 days, and the kitchen would smell like something other than a kitchen where a man eats standing up over the sink. She fixed the radio in the shop with a paperclip and a look of profound scorn. She sang along to it, badly, in Russian, in English, in what I am fairly sure was neither. She was ruthless about the crossword and would not be told that not knowing the words was a disadvantage. She read Wyatt's atlas at the table with her finger on the page, and one night she pushed it across to me, open at Montana, and put her finger on a spot in the eastern half and said, "Here." And I said, "About there," and she looked at that dot for a while and said, "It is very small on the map." "Everything is." "No," she said, "Chelyabinsk is very large on the map, beat." "It is a lie. It is a terrible place, but it is large." She laughed at that for about a minute alone, and then abruptly she stopped laughing and looked at the window and rubbed the stump of her finger with her thumb, back and forth. And I sat there in my own kitchen and understood, all at once, with the particular clarity of a man who has been slow about something for 4 months, that she was homesick for a place she could not go back to and would not have wanted to. I said, "Nadya." "Yes." I meant to say something about her mother. I meant to ask if she'd called her mother. Instead, what came out of my mouth was, "That name mean anything, over there?" She smiled, not at me at the window. "My grandmother said it is a heavy name," she said. "She said, do not put it down, and do not carry it in front of you where everyone can see." She got up and washed her bowl. She never did tell me what it meant. In June, a man named Holly's Renner drove up the lane in a truck that had never been off pavement. Renner works for a land company out of Denver. Not a rancher, not a developer exactly. One of these outfits that buys up grass and holds it and sells it in 8 years to somebody who buys up grass and holds it. He'd been at me twice before. This time he sat on my porch with his hat on his knee and gave me a number. It was a very good number. He said the things they say. Said I was carrying a lot of ground for one man and a hand. Said he understood the place had been in my family a long time, and he said that with the flat sincerity of a man reading it off an index card in his head. Said, and here he got delicate, and I watched him get delicate the way you watch a man wade into a bog. Said he understood I didn't have anybody coming up behind me. Out at the corral, Nadya was pushing a bull calf up the alley with her shoulder into his hip, swearing at him in Russian. Ivan was following her. Roy was leaning on the gate, not helping on purpose, because he thought it was funny. Renner looked out there, and then he looked at me, and he made the smallest movement with his eyebrows, the smallest possible movement, and it said, it said, I see, that's what this is. I have thought a great deal about what I should have said. What I did say was, leave the number, I'll think on it. And he did, and I did, and God forgive me, I thought about it every night for 2 weeks straight, lying in the dark doing arithmetic. Because here is the arithmetic. I was 61. The place ran on me and Roy was 68 with a shoulder that had quit answering the phone. The cattle market was what it was. I had a girl living over my shop with no papers, whose wages came out of a coffee can, who could not go to a doctor, could not open a bank account, could not get on an airplane, could not do one single thing in this country except work on my ranch until one of us died. And Renner's number would have set her up, legitimately, cash to a lawyer, cash to whatever passes for a life. I could have handed her a piece of that and told her to go be 24 somewhere. The arithmetic was clean. The arithmetic was so clean it kept me up nights. Clear wind SW15, says the ledger. Hot. No rain since the 2nd. 29 years of writing down the sky, and not one word about anybody in the house. The last week of June, a lightning strike put fire in the coulee on the east half. Nothing enormous, 300 acres, and the county truck came, and Bergstrom's boys came, and we had it black and out by 2 in the morning. Nadya went into the smoke after a heifer and a calf that had gone into the wrong corner and would not come out. Roy hollered at her. I hollered at her. She came out 11 minutes later leading the heifer by a rope halter with the calf staggering behind, and her eyebrows were gone, actually gone, singed off, and she had a burn on the inside of her forearm the shape of Idaho, and she was laughing. She was laughing. Standing in a black field at midnight with her eyebrows burned off and a rope in her hand, laughing so hard she had to put her hands on her knees, and Roy started laughing, and then I was laughing, and it went on for a while, all 3 of us in that black smoking field, laughing like lunatics. And on the drive back to the house, with her head against the window and her arm wrapped in a wet rag, she said, out of nowhere in the dark of the truck cab, I have not been afraid since March. I kept my eyes on the 2-track. That's the fire talking, I said. You'll be plenty afraid tomorrow when that arm wakes up. No, she turned her head. I could feel her looking at the side of my face. You do not understand. Since I am 15 years old, always here, she tapped her breastbone twice, something is standing up, always, waiting for a door, for a man, for a phone call. Tap, tap. In March it sat down. The road came up under the headlights and went away under the truck. A jackrabbit went sideways into the borrow pit. I did that, I said. which was a vain thing to ask, and I hate that I asked it. No, she said, gently, she said it very gently. The work did that, the cows did that, Ivan did that. A pause. You opened the barn door, that is all you did, Ellis, everything after I did. I did not say anything for a mile. Then I said, Renner's coming back Thursday. I know, she said, Roy told me. Roy talks too much. Roy has said maybe 40 words to me since March. That's what I mean, I said, he talks too much. She laughed, and then she stopped laughing, and neither of us said anything at all for the last 2 miles, because we both knew what Thursday was, and we were both, in our separate ways, cowards about it. We came up over the last rise and the yard light was on, which it should not have been, because I'd shut it off, and the ranch dog was on the porch making a sound I hadn't heard him make in 3 years, and there was a vehicle parked at the bottom of the steps. White rooftop bar, Rosebud County Sheriff's Department on the door. Nadya went absolutely still beside me. Not a flinch, not a gasp. Still, the way she'd been still in the barn under all those coats with her arms around a dying calf, waiting to find out what kind of thing was coming through the door. She said so quiet I nearly didn't catch it, Ellis. I put the truck in park. My hands were on the wheel and they did not look like my hands. Out on the porch, a deputy stood up out of the shadow with his hat in his hand, and he was very young, and he was already talking before he was down the steps. Beside me, in the dark, I heard the small dry sound of her thumb going back and forth across that missing fingertip. That's not fair. He was 23, but he had the kind of face that hadn't finished deciding what it was going to be, and he was standing on my porch turning his hat around and around by the brim like a man winding a clock, and the first words out of him were, "Mr. Petrie, your cows are on the highway." I sat in the truck with my hands on the wheel. "What?" I said. "Down by the cattle guard on 447, 15-20 head. Guy in a semi called it in about an hour ago. He liked to killed a black baldy. He put the hat on, took it off again. Everybody's fine. The trucker's fine, cow's fine. I've been up here 20 minutes hollering at your dog." I put my head down on the steering wheel and I laughed, and it was not a good laugh. It was the laugh that comes out of a man when the thing that was going to end his life turns out to be cows. Beside me, Nadya let out a breath she had probably been holding since the top of the rise. She got out of the truck with her arms still wrapped in the wet rag and she said, "The East Cattle Guard, the fire truck. County boys went through and did not shut it." Deputy Beauchamp looked at her, then at me, then back at her, the burned eyebrows, the black soot in the creases of her neck, the accent, and I watched him take it all in and file it in whatever drawer 23-year-old sheriff's deputies keep for things they don't understand. He said, "You want a hand pushing them back." We got them back by 2:30 in the morning. Beauchamp turned out to be useless with cattle and cheerful about it, and Nadya rode in the bed of his cruiser with the light bar going and waved at the cows like a beauty queen. And I have to tell you that in the whole 3-hour ordeal, I did not once think about the ranch or Renner or the number on that index card. At the gate before he left, Beauchamp leaned out his window. "Hey, not my business." He scratched his jaw. "There's a fella been in the wagon wheel a couple times, asking after a Russian gal, says he's owed money. The cold that went through me had nothing to do with the hour. He got a name. Didn't give it, 60s, real polite, real particular about being polite, you know the type." He looked at me a second longer than a boy that age ought to be able to look at a man my age. Wasn't asking as a friend is all I'd say. He drove off with his window down and one hand out of it, waving, 23 years old. I stood at the gate until his taillights went under the hill. When I turned around, Nadya was sitting on the top rail of the corral fence with her burned arm cradled in her lap, and Ivan was standing under her with his big crooked head against her knee, and she was looking east, at nothing, at the black. She said, "Carnes. That his name." He had my passport, she said, in a shoebox with everybody's. A pause. He is very polite. Deputy is right about this. He never once shouted at anyone, not once in all of it. Here's a thing about ranching that people who don't do it never understand. A crisis is a relief. A crisis has a shape. 15 head on the highway at midnight, you know exactly what to do about that. You get in the truck, you do it. And when the sun comes up, the problem is solved and you're too tired to think about anything else, which is the whole reason some of us stay in the business. What I had now had no shape. I could not call the sheriff about Carnes, because what would I say? There's a man in town looking for the illegal alien I've got living over my shop, whom I pay in cash out of a Folgers can. You do that once and there's no putting it back in the can. I could not send her away because where? On what bus, with what identification to what? I could not keep her because that word keep had started making a noise in my head like a truck with a rod knocking, and I couldn't unhear it. Roy had put it there. 2 weeks before the fire, he'd said, apropos of nothing, running a file down a sickle section. She's a hell of a hand. She is. Be a hell of a hand for 20 years. I'd said something like God willing. Roy had set the file down and pushed his glasses up on his forehead and looked at me. Roy Kesse is not a man given to speeches. His grandmother was born in a place her people had been moved to at gunpoint, and he has never in 19 years mentioned this to me, and I know it because I looked it up alone at night, like a coward. He said, Ellis, a person can't leave, you got no way of knowing if they'd have stayed. Then he put his glasses back down and went on filing. Thursday, Renner came up the lane. He'd brought a folder this time, which is how you know a man has decided you're going to say yes. Same hat, same truck, same clean boots. He shook my hand on the porch and said the grass looked good considering and asked about the fire, and said he'd read about it, which meant he'd looked it up, which meant he'd been watching my place from 400 miles away, and I noted that and put it in my pocket. We sat, he talked. I want to be honest about it. He didn't say one dishonest thing. Not one. Everything he told me about my situation was true, and he told it kindly, and that was somehow the ugliest part of it, that a stranger from Denver had bothered to look at my life closely enough to describe it correctly. He said the number again. Then he said a second number, which was the first number plus a life estate, meaning I could live in the house till I died, and after that it wasn't my problem because I'd be dead. I sat with my hands hanging between my knees, and I looked out at the corrals. She wasn't out there. I'd sent her to Forsyth with Roy for hydraulic hose, deliberately, because I did not want her standing in the yard while a man in clean boots put a number on the ground she'd walked out of a blizzard to find. I said, Mr. Renner, can I ask you something? Sure. When you look at this place, what do you see? He didn't answer right away, which I respected. Then he said, 940 deeded, water, mineral rights you never severed, which is unusual. He turned his coffee cup around on the arm of the chair. And a man who's going to be 70 in 9 years with nobody to hand it to. That's what I see. I'm sorry, you asked. I did ask. Mr. Petrie, I'll be straight with you. Somebody's going to buy this. Might be me. Might be a fella in 11 years who buys it out of an estate sale for 80 cents on the dollar from a niece in Spokane who's never seen it. He set the cup down. This isn't a question of whether. It's a question of who and when and how much of it you get to decide. That was the truest thing anybody said to me that whole year, and it came out of the mouth of a man I wanted to hit. I told him I'd call him Monday. He left the folder. Now I have to tell you about the coffee can, and I have to tell it right, because in my head I've cleaned it up 100 times, and I'm not going to clean it up here. The can lived in the mudroom on the shelf under the ledger. Folgers, red, lid gone soft from being taken off. 9 months of her wages in there, minus what she'd spent, which was almost nothing, because she didn't drink and didn't drive and had exactly 1 pair of boots. Friday night, I stood in the mudroom with the can in both hands. Because here's what I'd figured out, sitting on that porch with Renner's folder in my lap. The money in that can was not money. It was a rope, and I was holding both ends of it. Every dollar I put in there she could not spend anywhere it would be seen. Could not rent an apartment. Could not buy a car in her own name. Could not walk into a bank. All that can could do was sit on my shelf in my house on my ranch, getting heavier, and she could look at it and feel like a woman with savings. I had made a whole life for her the size of 940 acres, and I had told myself I was being kind. And she'd been so grateful. That was the part that sat in my throat. She'd been so grateful, and I'd let her be, and I'd gone to bed at night with that gratitude tucked around me like a good wool blanket, and slept better than I had in 3 years. Roy Casey had said, "A person can't leave, you got no way of knowing if they'd have stayed." I stood there with the can and I did the arithmetic one last time, the clean arithmetic, the arithmetic that had kept me up nights. Sell the ranch. Take Renner's number. Hand her a piece of it, a real piece, and put her on an airplane to anywhere, and let this ground go to a company that would run 400 yearlings on it and never once open the barn door at 4 in the morning. It was clean, it was so clean. It was also, and I only saw this standing in my own mudroom at 10 o'clock at night with a coffee can in my hands, the exact same shape as everything else that had ever been done to her. A man deciding. A man handing her a thing and telling her where to go with it. I put the can back on the shelf. Then I took the ledger down, and I sat on the bench with my boots still on, and I opened it to that day, and I wrote, "Clear wind SW10, warm, nothing to say about the sky." And under that, in the margin, where there is no line for it, "Nadya, ask her what she wants, ask her, ask." First time in 29 years, I wrote a name in that book. I asked her Sunday, at the kitchen table, with the atlas between us and her soup going cold. I told her about Renner. All of it, the number, the folder, the arithmetic. I told her about the can and the rope and both ends of it. I got through about 2/3 of it before my voice went to pieces on me, which was a new experience at 61, and I stopped and looked at the salt shaker for a while, and then I finished. She listened the whole way through, with her thumb going back and forth, across that missing fingertip. When I was done, she said, "You want to sell your father's ranch, to give me money, so that I am not," she searched and found it, and it landed like a hoof, "so that I am not your cow. That's about the size of it. Ellis," she pushed the bowl away, "this is the stupidest thing anyone has ever said to me, and I have been to Chelyabinsk." And then she put her face in her hands and cried, hard, for about 90 seconds, the way people cry who have not done it in front of anybody for years and have to get through the rusted part first. I sat there. I did not touch her. I have thought since that maybe I should have, and I don't know. When she came up, her eyes were red and her jaw was going, chewing on something, and she said, "Do not sell it, do not you dare." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "But I cannot stay like this. 9 months and she stopped, started over. I look at the calendar in the shop and I think 3 years, 5 years, and I am 40 and I have a coffee can and a man is dead who was good to me, and I am still a ghost in a country that does not know my name." The furnace kicked on under the floor. Ivan was bawling out at the fence for no reason at all, the way he did every night at 9. She said quietly, "Carnes had 11 passports in that shoebox." Monday, I called a lawyer in Billings. I want to be clear that I did not know one thing about what I was doing. I called a man named DeWitt because he'd handled my mother's estate, and DeWitt listened to about 4 minutes of me talking in circles and then said, "Ellis, stop. Do not tell me any more of this on a telephone, and do not tell it to anybody else at all. There's a woman here does immigration. I'll call her." Her name was Ms. Ocampo, and she gave us 50 minutes on a Wednesday in an office with a dead fern in it. And she asked Nadya questions in a voice like somebody reading a grocery list, on purpose, because the questions were not grocery list questions. "Did the employer retain your passport?" "Yes." "Were you told what would happen if you left?" Yes. Were the other girls' passports also retained? Yes. How many? 11, maybe 12. Do you know their names? Nadya sat very straight in the chair and said, yes. And then she named them. All of them. She had never written them down anywhere because writing them down was dangerous. So she had simply carried 11 names in her head across 2 states and 1 winter and a burning coolie. And she said them out loud in an office in Billings, in order, without stopping. And Ms. Ocampo's pen did not move for a second, and then it moved very fast. There is a visa. I did not know this. There is a whole category of visa for people who have been used the way she'd been used, and it exists, and it works, and it is very hard, and the price of it is this. You have to tell it, all of it, to people with badges on the record, with your name on it. And then you have to be findable for years, by anybody who wants to look, including him. Ms. Ocampo laid it out flat. No comfort in her voice, which I came to understand was the kindest thing about her. She said the process could take 2 years, 3. She said there would be a period where Nadya would be more exposed, not less. She said the thing that would carry it was the other 11. That Nadya could sit alone and be a woman with a story, or she could sit with a federal investigator and be a witness. And those were 2 different women with 2 different futures, and only one of them ever got a driver's license. She said, it's your choice. It has to be. I want you to understand that if you say no today, I will still shake your hand. Nadya looked at her hands in her lap, left ring finger short by a knuckle. She said, if I do this, the girls in the shoebox, what happens for them? Ms. Ocampo took her glasses off. Some of them get found, she said. Some of them we never find, but it doesn't start unless somebody says the names. She was gone 6 days later. Not far, Billings, a house run by a church, a room with 2 beds and a woman named Dolers who had done this 100 times. But that is not the same as 4 miles off the county road, and I want to be honest about what it was like, which was, I drove her down there and I helped carry a duffel bag up a flight of stairs, and the whole way back to Rosebud County I had to keep pulling over. Before she got out of the truck she said, you will feed Ivan the way I feed him, not the way you feed him. I said, that animal is going to eat me out of house and home. She said, good, and she got out, and then she came back to the window and stood there with the duffel bag on her shoulder, chewing on something, jaw going. She had a look on her face I'd only seen once in a barn at 4 in the morning, when she was checking to see if a nose was still fogging. She said, Ellis, say the name. I didn't understand. The word you do not have in English, she said. Do it anyway. So I sat there in my truck in front of a church house in Billings, Montana, with my hands on the wheel. And I said, out loud, to nobody, in a voice that came out about the size of a dime. Wyatt Ellis Petrie, he was 19. And she nodded once, hard, like a woman signing something, and she went up the walk and up the steps and did not look back, which I have always been grateful for. I did not sell the ranch. I want to be very careful not to make that sound noble. I didn't sell it because DeWitt showed me a way to lease half the grass and run the rest on shares with Bergstrom's outfit, and because Roy's nephew Tomas came on in the spring and turned out to be worth 2 of me, and because at 62 I discovered that a man can survive doing less than he thinks he can survive doing. I called Renner and told him no. He said he'd check back in 5 years. He was not unkind about it. He'll probably be right eventually. 2 years and 8 months. That is how long it took. 2 years and 8 months of paper and waiting, and 1 interview in a federal building in Denver that took 11 hours. And another 8 months of nothing at all, and 1 afternoon in the middle of it when she called me from a pay phone and did not speak for a full minute, just breathed, and then said, it is fine. I am fine. Tell me about the calves. And I told her about the calves for 40 minutes and neither of us said one other thing. They found 4 of the 11. 4 out of 11. She's never once said that number to me like it was a victory, and she's never once said it like it was a defeat. Carnes did about 6 years. It should have been more. I've made my peace with the fact that it should have been more and wasn't, in the sense that I think about it maybe twice a month instead of every day. She got the green card in the fall. She's in Billings still. She took a job at a feed store and hated it, and now she's doing something with the state extension office that involves driving to ranches and telling grown men things they don't want to hear, at which she is very, very good. She calls on Sundays. Now I'll tell you what she gave me, since that's the whole reason you've sat here this long, and I'll tell you that I've had 11 years to find the word for it, and I still don't have it. It wasn't company, I had Roy. It wasn't a reason to keep the place. The place doesn't need a reason, it's just there being ground. Here's the closest I can come. I've got that ledger, 29 years of it when she came, 40 now. And for 29 years I wrote down the sky every single day because the sky was the only thing in my life that I could set down without it costing me something. Clear. Wind and 15 gusting. Cold for the date. My son died and I wrote about the wind. Now I'll show you an entry. Last April. Nothing special about the day. Overcast, wind SE5. Rain by evening 2/10 THS. Good. In called, bought a car. An actual car, blew hers. Told her about the heifer with the twin. She said name them both. Told her I miss her. That last line took me 4 minutes to write. I sat on the mudroom bench with the pen in my hand for 4 minutes. That's it, that's the thing. She didn't give me happiness and she didn't give me a daughter. She is not my daughter. She has a mother in Chelyabinsk whom she calls on Wednesdays, and I have never once pretended otherwise. What she gave me was the ability to write a person down, to say a name in a room out loud and let it be in the room. 40 years I'd been a man with a book full of weather, and she came into my barn out of 31 below and put her bare hands under a dying calf, and by the time she left, there was a name in the book. You cannot buy that. I know, because I had Holly's Renner's number in a folder in my kitchen drawer for 2.5 years, and I used to take it out and look at it, and it was a very good number, and it could not have bought me one single word of that entry. Ivan died last March, 19 years old, which is unheard of, and he went in the corral in the sun with his crooked head down in the good grass. Roy and I buried him with the tractor, which took most of a day, and neither of us said anything the whole time, and when we were done Roy leaned on the shovel and said, "The Russian," and that was the funeral. I called her that night. She was quiet a long while. Then she asked what the weather had been, which is a joke between us now, and I said clear, wind north, cold for the date. She said, "Ellis, do you know what my grandmother's word meant? Nadya." I said no. I'd looked it up once years ago, and then I'd closed the book, because I'd wanted her to be the one who told me. She said it, and then she said the thing about carrying it, do not put it down, do not carry it in front of you where everyone can see, and she said, she was wrong about the second part. The line hummed. 200 and some miles of wire between a kitchen in Billings and a mudroom in Rosebud County. Out my window the yard light was on. And I know it's foolish. I know exactly how foolish it is. But I stood there with the phone against my ear looking out at that empty corral where a crooked old steer used to stand at 9 o'clock every night bawling at nothing. And I thought about a barn door in the dark, and how it opens outward, and how a man never knows in advance which side of it he's on. She was still talking. Something about the car, the blue car, and a road and Sunday. I didn't hear all of it. I was still looking at the